Welcome to episode 146 of A Pint With Seaniebee. As those of you who are regular listeners know, we are in the midst, or the beginnings, of the Don's top 20 countdowns of the best episodes. The Don is here with me again today. How are you?
Not great. I've been stricken down with coronavirus.
So we're doing this at the very end of January, and the Don reckons she may be the first Irish victim of the coronavirus. Possibly because she had too many beers last night.
No, because...
It's terrible for Corona, isn't it?
I order a lot of shit off Wish, so, it could happen.
Oh,
Yeah. No, I have a slight bit of a cold. Now, you know that feeling...
You never get colds.
Well, no, you know what happens to me? You know that feeling that when you get just the back of your throat and you're okay, but you're like, oh shit, in 24 hours this is going to be a really bad chest infection. For the past 4 years, I've been getting that and going, oh fuck, this is going to be a beast. And then it just disappears after a day or two. I very, very rarely get properly sick, but I get that kind of tingling where I go, oh, this is going to be bad. And then it just goes away. And I think it might be my wonderful diet of wine, Turkish chocolate, and chicken nuggets.
There you go. All the nutritionists listening, Cocoa Pops, chicken nuggets, better than an apple a day. As you know on the podcast, whenever the Dawn appears, she always brings a bottle with her. Those of you who listened to the last show will know that I'm doing kind of a dry January, as I do every year. What have you got for us today?
Today I have Super Value Signature Taste Sparkling Elderflower Press. Is it press or pressing?
Press.
Well, what's the fucking story with the
It's just
not grab, the other one?
Yeah.
So I did have...
So what is it? It's sparkling wine?
Yeah, basically it's elderflower shit. It's meant to be like Prosecco, but there's no booze in it because Sean's on the fucking dry. And
I might add that the Dawn does not join me on this, so I'm busy making her drinks for one when she comes over and she gets hammered and I'm sitting there like, ugh.
By the way, it's Brexit Day today.
Today is the day that Britain are crashing out of Europe and we're going to have... I'll open it. Oh, there we go. That's the sound effect.
Yeah. So the day that's in it, I thought, right, they had that, that swanky lemonade comes in like a pink version as well. It has the fancy cork top and they want like fucking €4 for its fucking lemonade. But it's French, and I thought, well, now fuck yous. We'll get the French one because we're still in the EU. And I thought to myself, that's elderflower, and I'll drink a small bit of that and I'll be like, fuck it, I'll put gin into it. So I got the elderflower.
Do you want some gin in that?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I offer in solidarity.
Britain leaving the European Union with a whimper, apart from that arsehole of Nigel Farage's pathetic whatever he did.
Oh, his little tantrum.
Yeah, his little
Mairead
tantrum.
McGuinness wasn't having a bar of it.
So Mairead McGuinness is the chair. She's chairing the European court of whatever.
The Charing Court or whatever they call it in Europe. I don't know.
Just sort of say, get the fuck out and take your flags with you. It's amazing the way the whole Britain thing, it's been 4 years of fucking nonsense and division and gnashing of teeth and governments falling and order and votes and Boris Johnson and Theresa May doing her dance. And now it's just like they're gone.
It
and
is
it's like,
better
fuck
with gin.
off, get out. She's now got gin in her drink.
It's better with gin, sorry.
Anyway, here's a cheers to Britain. Good luck.
Cheers.
And all who's sailing her. I hope
But you know what I'm enjoying?
Back, and I hope you enjoy what Boris Johnson is going to do to your country. But one of the things that's interesting about Boris Johnson, this guy Dominic Cummings, who's his kind of evil machinator. I read a piece about him recently, and he's planning to really bring wealth and
to the north of England,
which would be hilarious if this Boris Johnson government, I can't see it, but if they actually did a kind of a reverse New Labour, if the Tories became more like Labour in the same way that Blair's Labour became more like the Tories, and they kind of started fixing things and getting the NHS back and getting people, Hull and places like this and Sunderland back on their feet. I mean, it would be hilarious.
Yeah.
It would just throw everything.
It would be, wouldn't it?
I wonder then if the hardline Tories go, what the fuck are you doing? We're supposed to be bathing in all the moolah that we've got.
It's quite simple that for the Brexit voters, you were just supposed to tell the working class people that they're allowed to be racist, then they'll vote for us. We don't start looking after them, making sure they can feed their children. What are you doing? Yeah. We're Tories.
Yeah.
But what I'm enjoying today, and I'm Irish, so there was a little bit of me that was like, no. But I'm upset for the people who are not arseholes. So I thought, now, rein it in. It's not funny. What's really fucking funny is they leave tonight at 11 p.m. Why? Because it's on Brussels time. It's like Cinderella. They leave at 12 on Brussels time. And the best part is, essentially, tomorrow they will have left but they will still be paying to the EU and they will still be following EU laws, including any new laws that are changed over the next 12 months, except they're not going to have anybody representing them.
No.
So they're actually Europe's bitch now until December. But congratulations.
A vassal state. I just think, looking back at it, it was just, it's 4 years of our life we won't get back, reading articles in the paper, panicking. I mean, okay, let's see what happens. I don't really give a shit anymore. We're also in the throes, as we mentioned the last time, of the snap Irish general election, which is due to transpire on the 8th, which is this day week. I don't know, we've been following it closely. We were going to do a podcast on it, but we kind of went...
Yeah. And also, how many of your listeners are actually Irish?
Yeah, very few. Those of you who are listening, I want to scroll forward 20 minutes in is when this juicy part of the podcast starts. And scroll through there if you don't want to listen to us bitching for a few minutes about the Irish political situation. Political. So we have one of the things that's happening for anyone who's not Irish is that there's been two parties in power in Ireland for the entire last 100 and odd years since the foundation of the state. They're called Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and they take turns in fucking things up, basically. And for the first time this year, the political wing of the IRA, as they were called, IRA being the terrorist organisation fighting for Irish unity in the 60s, 70s.
Oh my God, you fucking tam.
Well, that's what they were doing. They were trying to...
Oh, you're such a fucking tam.
They were trying to get Irish, United Ireland through force and violence. And
that's a bit revisionist.
Well, I don't know. I think
let's throw back here. You had the IRB, which is the Irish Republican Brotherhood, which was there for a purpose. And like all armies, when there's no purpose there anymore, they turn into thugs and gangsters. That's what happened with the IRB. Then with the IRA, at the start of the Troubles, they did get into crime, obviously. It did start for serious reasons. There was massive discrimination up the north. There was just no life to be had if you were Catholic. So I'm not, Jesus, I'll put my balaclava away in a minute. I'm just... Could you be any more West Brit in your summation?
Well, they blew up churches in Enniskillen. They blew up innocent shoppers in Omagh. They have got a badly stained hands.
Yeah, come here to me shaking.
Innocent people.
On both sides.
Yeah,
no part of me is kind of going, isn't it great? Yeah. And particularly as the end went on. It's the Good Friday Agreement was fantastic, and the fact that nobody thought that we'd see peace in our lifetime. So no part of me is kind of going... As
I say, the North is riddled with peace.
Riddled with peace.
So anyway, the political wing of the IRA was known as Sinn Féin, run by people like who you might have heard of, Jerry Adams, Martin McGuinness, who died recently. They also have a political party down south, and it's starting to gain a lot of traction. People, I think, are fed up with what we have as two centre-right parties, which are very similar in all things except they were on different sides of our civil war in the 20s. And this new Sinn Féin, led by a sort of a finger-jabbing, balchy woman called Mary Lou MacDonald, seems to be making progress, as are the Green Party. No surprises there.
I was, in fact, a member of Sinn Féin.
Yeah, you see, it's all coming out now.
It's all coming out in the wash now. Not that I would have...
I can imagine you with an Armalite in one hand and a ballot box in the other.
I had that look about me now. The reason I was because I was in my teens and I was interested in politics, and I had absolutely fuck all interest in making the tea. So we're talking like 2005, 2006. What political party can I get involved in that all I have to do is say, I'm a Gaeilgeoir, meaning I'm fluent in Irish, and I can string a sentence together. I am still a 15-year-old in a fucking hoodie and flared jeans. What dickhead party is actually going to let me get involved? I know, Sinn Féin. So I joined Sinn Féin. I wasn't going to run for them. Sure, I wasn't old enough to vote. But it was very interesting. And also, my dad fucking hated it. So there was that. So I joined, and I was a member for a certain amount of time. And then I was like, grand, yeah. So all I wanted to see, it was very interesting. Now, this was when Mary Lou, who is now the president of Sinn Féin, was strutting around, making herself known, getting cozying up to Jerry Adams, because Jerry Adams was still there. And in our area, basically, you've got the local TD, he was elected, he was lovely, and then you've got maybe 5 or 6 really intelligent people, and then you've got 30 odd fuckwits that live in their ma's box bedroom and play the wolf tones like IRA songs day and night, have absolutely no idea what Bun Up Nairn, which is the constitution, how many pages are in it, what is it, not a fucking notion have they, except Chucky our law, 32 counties. That's all it is. It's literally like 12-year-olds that never grew up. And that's quite frightening because they're the money behind it, even though they have piss all money, but they will give all the money towards it. And there were underground in pubs meetings where the surviving hunger strikers were there and IRA songs were sung. And it's very interesting to have been sat there with Mary Lou at the time. And now I see her on the telly and, you know, all is well. And she's well able to... But, like, I was there with the lads who were absolutely in the rat still at the time.
Yeah. There you go. That's
so, I mean, I speak from... However,
Mary
Mary Lou is from a Fianna Fáil party. She's not a fucking Sinn Féiner at all because she, like me, obviously made the same connection, decided if I go into Sinn Féin, I'm educated, I'm not going to be making the fucking tea. So she sailed right up the ranks because there was no competition. And that is why Mary Lou is in Sinn Féin.
So the basic problems in Ireland are we've been pretty good with the current government in terms of our performance outside Ireland, as in how we handled the Brexit thing. We stuck to our guns, we defended our corner, Europe backed us and helped us, and we've worked out a workable, I think, solution to the border between Northern Ireland and the South vis-a-vis the EU. But at home, they've been dreadful.
Yeah, I think we both agree, and it's maybe an unpopular opinion, but we would argue our point. Fine Gael are, by a country mile, the most competent party. And when I say competent, I mean they're the most educated, they know what they're doing, they're the party who are best positioned to sort the country out. However, not in a fucking hot fit would I vote for them. They don't give a fuck about the poor or anyone but themselves. They are neoliberal. I don't trust their intention and they will continue to let us starve. So, bottom line, I'd rather the incompetent fucks who are actually going to try for us.
So to sum up what's going on, since the economic crash of 2007-2008, we had Troika sent in from Europe to program us all for austerity, and then a huge uptick happened in the country based on technology giants, Amazon, Facebook, Google coming into the country. It's awash with money again. We're the 7th richest country in the world, I think, or something. But as usual in these situations, the poor got left behind. Homelessness got out of control. Our health system is creaking at the seams constantly. It just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And there's vulture funds sitting on properties. Nothing's been developed. We call it an emergency. We don't do anything. And there's a sort of a general... There's a great quote in the Irish Times, which is that these two, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, are playing 20th century politics with a 21st century electorate. Well, it's looking likely that one of the two is going to form government.
Well, yeah.
Maybe with Sinn Féin.
A week ago we were talking about this and you were kind of saying no one's voting Sinn Féin. And I'm like, yeah, anybody who doesn't live near the Slorgan dual carriageway, quite a few people are. And it's not necessarily that they like their politics, but it's the only party that has any hope of getting a fair few seats that isn't Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. Now, Fianna Fáil are basically Fine Gael for muck savages. And they're less educated, but they're still going to bow down and do everything that Fine Gael do. Yeah, they're more builders than accountants, but they're still going to fuck us over, except they're going to do a shittier job abroad. And the other thing about Fianna Fáil is that a lot more anti-choicers on it, a lot more God botherers. So and things like repeal...
Anti-choice being the abortion referendum
at
the time was a big part of it.
Repeal happened. Not quite 2 years ago, repeal happened. And that's all shits and giggles. Great. Wonderful. But that's up for review in the next 4 years. And the government that's in next is going to be important.
We're lucky in one sense that we don't appear to have a Trump or a Orban or a Bolsonaro. We watched that great documentary last night called The Edge of Democracy, which is up for an Oscar, which is all about what the hell is going on in Brazil at the moment. It's collapsing like a flan in a cupboard. We don't appear to have that here. We appear to have weathered that pretty well.
What we have is a very, very fragmented left. That we seriously need to get that together, particularly when you look what's happening with populism all over. We have had those characters, it's just they're not being taken seriously. Basically, they're just built upon the reason it's a housing crisis because of all the immigrants, Ireland's for the Irish, the Great Replacement theory, all that kind of shit. In the meantime, we have people for profit, we have Social Democrats, we have some independents, we just haven't been able to get it together. And I go, Now, I don't want Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael in, nor do I want them to amalgamate because that becomes a one-party situation. Sinn Féin, I think, are really important whether I like them or not. I would prefer them to go in this time, even if they make bollocks of it. If nothing else, if Fine Gael get in again in 4 years' time, I want them to get in not with a mandate to continue on as they are. I want them to get in knowing you took it too far last time. You took it too far. Wind your neck in. If nothing else, that. And if whoever gets in next bankrupts the country, so be fucking it. So many of us are kind of okay with that because we survived last time, we'll survive next time, but we won't survive what happens if Fine Gael keep going how they're going. I understand if you're over a certain threshold, if you own your own home, you go, I don't want the economy to crash again. But some of us, particularly people my age, are so badly fucked that we go, crash the fucking economy, just give us a house. Like, it's that bad. Suicide rates are astronomical. There's no mental health. And a lot of the promises that are being made by the smaller parties are on mental health grounds because, you know, it's a popular one. But there are some important ones going in there. Like, I think it was Soc Dems, Social Democrats have this idea for, I think it was Limerick General Hospital, but I think it should be rolled out, even just in one in Dublin, one in Cork, that there was an emergency department for mental health. Because there is no worse place in the world for somebody who's in crisis than A&E. And I have a lot of time for doctors and nurses, but I'll be honest with you, I have been in that situation and they're fucking evil in how they behave.
You're talking about people who are
suicidal in crisis.
Who attempted suicide, tend to do it again.
There are teams of volunteers, particularly around the Shannon. So this is why Limerick is an interesting...
The Shannon is the biggest river in Ireland. People throw themselves into it.
Yeah, they do. So they've got particular points along the Shannon where they have these volunteers. And some of these volunteers are people who have lost loved ones to suicide. And they go out at night and they keep watch and they talk people down. They find someone who they suspect is gone. And they have had people that they've talked down and they've brought into A&E because they're in crisis after they've talked down. And that same person's thrown themselves into the river a couple of hours later after the treatment they got in A&E because there's nowhere for you, off you pop. It's just not good enough. Whoever is there with you can say, where do we take her tonight? She's in trouble. What do we do? And that's not a huge amount of money, but that's really fucking important. Even if Sinn Féin got in and magically we got some rainbow coalition of the left, if they completely crash the economy in the next 4 years, but if they introduce something like that, and if they built homes that less people were homeless, most of the country aren't going to give a shit, really, that the economy crashed because they can afford to house themselves and their children.
Well, we crashed the economy, and the poor people had to shoulder the blame of the rich banks crashing the economy. So I went away in '96. When I left in '96, the same problems, I've said this before in the podcast, that existed then are the same problems, only worse. We had a housing problem then. Tony Gregory was all over it, and a homeless problem. We had a health system that was creaking again, that was bodies on trolleys overnight. We had an education system that needed reform, but no one's really mentioning that in this election thing. But the key thing for me is the lack of ideas, the lack of innovative ideas. That even in this election, all at the hustings, they're all going on about, we're going to build this number of houses, and they don't even know whether they can get the builders or the doctors to go in and help the health system. There's no creativity. There's no taking over brand sites that have been held by venture funds and taxing the shit out of them every year until they sell them. The last point is that our parliament is just a talking fest, and there's so little action. And so little, people say, you could do this and time goes by and things get worse and worse and worse. So we've got a week out. We're not going to spend too much time on the Irish election, but my view on it is this election, I'm just not going to vote for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. I think they've had enough time. I think there's dangers to that. I think we need to have a higher voice of social democratic parties at the table. Yep. Be that Sinn Féin, be that Labour, be that any of the other ones you mentioned. So anyway, the Irish election will be done and dusted by the time we're back on air here. Those of you who know what's going on is the Dawn has spent probably much more time than she thought she was listening through the episodes of A Pint With Seaniebee. She's picked a top 20. The last episode that went out was number 20 in no particular order, right?
Yeah, no particular order.
That was Laura Jordan Bambach. And when we announce number 19 in the countdown, I don't know who she's picked, so she does a little quiz on one of the interviews I did and see if I can get it. So let's start there. So
your first question. This person said, if I ever ask myself the question, I wonder what it would have been like, well then I should go and do it. I'd say a few people have said something along those lines. Yeah, that's why I asked you that question first, John. This is the hard question. Okay, move on. And since it's Brexit themed today, who once worked in Brussels? Okay, somebody worked in Brussels. Do you want to move on to your final question? My final question. Who did you exchange Sean Connery impressions with? Sure, perhaps. Now, I know you frequently do it, but who did you exchange them with? Shit. Shaken notched out. This was a reference to his father. Person. No. What's worked in Brussels?
Okay, it's beaten me.
Jesus Christ, Sean. Stephen Fraser.
The James Bond of advertising.
There you go. His dad was 007.
So Stephen Fraser is a advertising guy who's been all around the world, and everywhere he goes, it seems that there's a war breaks out around.
Yeah, that's a bit curious, isn't it?
But he went into Bahrain at the start of the Gulf War. He was in the Philippines when it went off there. He was in North and South Korea. He was in Dubai. And yeah, we talk about Islam and Erdogan's Turkey and Duarte in Philippines. So yeah, a good one. So what was your take on that one?
All right, so part of the reason I chose him for today was the day that's in it, Brexit. I found it interesting that he has a take on different cultures. Now, you have a lot of people who are expats, and expats is basically immigrant. If you make 100 grand or more, you're not an immigrant, you're an expat, which I always find really amusing. Just fucking mind-blowing. So expat is posh for immigrant. But Stephen has a particular interest in politics, I think, and has an interesting take on the political sphere and culture, and I found it interesting to listen to. It's an all-rounder, and I just thought the day that's in it, we could do with a little bit more internationalism. Also, so you discussed the decline of Europe and the merits of benign fascism. And at one point, you were discussing, both of you, the merits of Erdogan. Now, in fairness, neither of you are saying, isn't he great? We love Erdogan. We love all that he says. But there was the merits of it, and it's really interesting to listen back now, because a bit of time's passed, and I remember him saying that as long as the artist doesn't go too far, it is interesting to note, while he's not a big fan of all of his policies, certainly, but it's interesting to note that a little bit more gets done sometimes. And this week, it was announced that Turkey has proposed a bill whereby rapists can go free from punishment if they marry their victims, including underage girls. Yeah. Now, this is not the first time. Like, in 2016, something similar was tabled, but it was quashed. This one seems to be worse. And it seems that Erdogan is pretty much behind it. By the way, neither of you were advocating that, but I just thought it was interesting to look back at that. What's that, 3 years ago?
3 years ago.
Yeah, so 3 years on, I find that interesting, particularly today, and with all that's gone on this week.
Well, he's in bed with Putin and...
Who's Stephen? Jesus, Stephen!
And Erdogan's causing all the problems in Syria as well at the moment. And so, yeah, he's a strong-armed dictator in the mould of Donald Trump, Putin, and Orban, and Duarte, and the guy who's Bolsonaro in Brazil. So, what was his quote again at the start?
His quote at the start? Oh, the first question.
Yeah.
Was, if I ever asked myself the question, I wonder what it would have been like, then I should go and do it.
That's a good way to introduce the James Bond of advertising, Stephen Fraser. We'll see you next time with number 18 on the countdown.
See you next time.
And cheers to Brexit.
Cheers. Down at the door, hit you on the way out.
Welcome to another episode of A Pint with Seaniebee, coming to you today, would you believe, from Istanbul in Turkey. I'm actually in a bar called the Bosphorus Brewing Company, and I have a very interesting and peripatetic guest with me, a man who works here now but has lived and worked all over the world and still does work all over the world. This is just his base. His name is Stephen Fraser. He's a business development director of Ogilvy and Mather and works on primarily Pizza Hut and Yum Brands, which includes KFC, and he's in charge of that globally. But he's had... How long have you been with Ogilvy?
Been with Ogilvy since 1984.
Ogilvy is one of probably the only real agencies out there at the moment who have lifers, who have a lot of people who've been there for a long time and have been looked after.
Yes, I think looked after for me is not necessarily in the material way, I have to say. Although that's okay, I can afford to buy a pint of beer for Shawnee here. I think looked after for me has been that I'm now living in my 9th country, and I think looked after in that respect has mean that I've had a kind of sense of new adventure and new discover every 3 to 5 years, and I think that passion for an inquisitiveness and a passion for discovery and new cultures and new things is what's really been my goal and mission, and I suppose in that respect, yes, I've been looked after.
Tell me a little bit about, first of all, maybe let's go on your life journey. Where are you from, and where were you born?
Yeah, so I was born in London, based in a famous place called Wimbledon, from a Scottish father and a Swiss-French mother, which means that I'm half Scottish, quarter Swiss, quarter English, which, if you research carefully, is exactly the same nationality as a famous character of whom I resemble, and that's James Bond.
He does look a little bit like James Bond, but maybe in his autumn years.
Yes, I know what you mean.
So, for perhaps the rest of the podcast, we'll just do James Bond impressions, Miss Moneypenny.
Yes, well, I think I will add to that in that my father was in the Foreign Office, and his security number was Peter Fraser 007. There you go.
Look at that.
There you go.
So, growing up in Wimbledon, were you sneaking under the tennis?
We were. We went there I guess I started playing tennis when I was 3 or 4.
Right.
As people meet me and they say, where are you from? And I say, Wimbledon. They say, when do you want a game? Not how good are you or do you play?
So tell me, what was college like and how were you in school? You seem like a bright fellow.
Well, I don't know whether I was academically very bright. I was probably sort of more inquisitively bright and wanted to do things the way I wanted to do them. So I don't say I rebel against teachers, but I certainly tried to learn in a very different way.
Yeah.
And in fact, in the end, I ended up going not to university. I got into a couple of universities. I went to a polytechnic. And the pure reason was that those days, polytechnics offered very good vocational, practical approaches.
Yeah.
And most importantly, and I think this is where things started to kick off, with a year overseas. I was doing international marketing and French. The third year was a work experience.
In France?
Nope, it was actually in Brussels. I probably got the best of the lot. I got the headquarters of Levi's for Europe. Their agency at that time was McCann, and I was on the client side. In fact, after a year of doing that, the guys at McCann said, we kind of like your attitude, would you come and work for us? And they actually offered me a job in Brussels.
Brilliant.
And I actually said no.
Okay.
I probably need to, firstly, if I'm going to join the ad brigade, I'll start in London. And secondly, I probably should finish my degree. I owe it to my dad, if nothing else.
That was the seed that was sown.
That was the seed that was sown, and I was picked up by McCann's in London and started there.
Right.
And then I worked on some international business, and I think it was from there that I was headhunted by Ogilvy to come and work on their international. At that time was their new client, which was Parker Pens. And so I joined January the 1st, 1984. And so I guess, started to get on the global train. I remember at that time, the CEO of Ogilvy London coming to me and saying, you've been working a lot with the Middle East. We have a joint venture there, and we want to Ogilvy-ize the joint venture partners so we can, buy them. And can you go there and help to do that? And the Middle East was on the radar, and I suppose I had a slightly, I always call it kind of pioneering Indiana Jones attitude, which was, if I ever asked myself the question, I wonder what it would have been like, I should go and do it. And I thought, well, I could say no, but then 6 months later I would have said, I wonder what it would have been like. So it's better to answer the question.
Well, one of the
than
things about the podcast is trying to learn these lessons that you've learned from life. I usually wait for the end, but that's one of the things that I would also agree with you. The things that scared me the most that I did were the things that in hindsight were the best things.
Yeah, and I think you've got to let the answer come through experience. And as it was, I had a fabulous time. I landed just before the Gulf War started. So I was in Bahrain, and I was running the office there, and then I got moved to Dubai. So that's place number 4. So Brussels, London, Dubai, Bahrain.
What age were you by then?
I was just under 30. The Gulf War came in when we were in Bahrain, so we were sealed off. There happened to be about 850 Gulf Air stewardesses also trapped in the same place.
Nice.
So just through sheer charity and hospitality.
You took some of them in and
we did, but actually they looked after us because we still had to work, and they didn't.
You could bring them in and give them a bed, and they would bring you breakfast.
Maybe they did. Exactly, but there was a slightly serious note in that the sirens would go off whenever the Scuds were coming in, and 2 or 3 of them were awake, and then they would call 2 more and 2 more and 2 more, and for us who were actually having to work, it was actually, being slightly serious for a moment, it was a sort of life-saving system.
Quite scary,
it was a bit scary. You didn't know quite what's going to happen. We all had gas masks.
Even watching it on TV, it was the first war that was like almost a video game, and those Scuds looked like they didn't know. They're very well named. They look like really dense.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Americans, as you remember, missed a lot of them.
Yes.
And I just remember the first day it all kicked off. It was January 17th. My dad calling me from home and saying, so what's happening? And I lived quite near the airport, and I said, well, listen to this, and I put the phone out the window, and
the sound of distant tank fire.
Well, no, it was just the jets going off on their first sorties to Baghdad, and it was quite intense. And you after a while we got a bit sort of blasé about it, but that didn't stop parents and relations obviously being a bit more concerned. So one couldn't say, "Oh, don't worry, Mum, it's all right," and we're going out for a beer, because we were going out for beers.
Yeah.
But there were a couple of incidents that had to make you
I love
smile.
the idea of like, oh, the new billboard campaign just got bombed to
You
shit
just got bumped in.
today.
Well, no, we had much worse things than that. And then our favourite Italian restaurant, we went in there as a group, and our favourite Italian restaurant, and the Italian owner came running up and said, "Disaster, guys, disaster." We thought, "Oh my God, the wine cellar's been blown up." And we probed and we pushed and we all sat down. He said, "Listen, I've just run out of fresh asparagus."
Oh, Jesus.
We all got up and promptly left, because that is a war-torn environment.
In better news, your wee won't smell as much as it.
Yeah, that is exactly right. So we had to go for the Ossobuco instead. So that was an adventure. And
So this was 91 you were there.
yeah, and then went to Dubai when it was sort of being
Dubai is
warm.
interesting. We talk about that for a bit, because I just came. I was in Dubai last week for about 4 or 5 days, first time there, and it reminded me of like a drunk guy who's got $300 billion to spend as fast as possible on skyscrapers.
Yes,
and
yes.
he's duly doing so.
Yes.
What you're closer to it? Is there any truth in that?
In those days when I first went there, it was really being born. And if everyone wants a conspiracy theory that sort of CNN and the Americans actually invented Dubai, because actually that's what happened, is that Bahrain was really the centre of the financial world, of the Arab world, the Gulf world, and particularly maybe not the Arab world. And then everybody deserted to Dubai, and Dubai was really born out of the commerce that then brought. Because remember, Dubai's got no oil, Abu Dhabi's got the oil, Qatar's got oil, Kuwait's got oil, Saudi's got oil, but Dubai doesn't really happen. So it relied on the huge port, the duty-free aspect of it, which is the Jebel Ali port, you might have heard of that, and then making it a magnificent place for people to do business and to work. And
The Maktoum family.
The Maktoum family, and I have to say that the vision of the Maktoum family was incredible.
Yeah.
And out of the deserts came Dubai. And I think what you see is maybe not particularly deep, but the thought behind it is brilliant.
It felt a little bit like the same kind of vision that Lee Kuan Yew had for Singapore, which was like, but I felt that the Singapore thing, you can sort of see the planning, you can feel what they're trying to do, you can see the kind of vague cultural thing that they have going and keeping.
The one thing that Singapore has very differently, it has a colonial past. I mean, people have been there in a history, so it has a legacy that people have built upon.
If you've been to Bangalore or Mumbai,
and Delhi,
that's no guarantee.
There's no guarantee, but at least it's a slightly different way. Whereas Dubai was a vision of one man, one family. They've created this mega city, which I have to say is a fantastic place to live, as long as you're not looking for too much historical antiquities to go and explore.
We, as Eddie Izzard said, we restored this car park to the way it looked over 20 years ago.
Yes, that's absolutely right. But you can do things. I mean, one of the beautiful things about Dubai is the desert. I mean, it's the desert is a beautiful place, and I've been out there at night, and I've camped overnight, and I've thrown a snowboard down a dune mountain, so it's got all of that adventure, it's 4-wheel drives and all that. Innovation is never far from their thought, and this pays respect to the kind of Arab culture and doesn't make the Arab look so dependent on oil. And I think where the UAE as a country, and Dubai in particular, stands out is that they've put the Arab character and personality in a place rather than just say it's a bunch of people who kind of just thrive off oil, because they don't have any oil.
When you look at the stagnation at best, decline maybe at worst of major European countries, how much of this do you think is as a result of democracy versus an iron fist from one man? Lee Kuan Yew, you talk about Singapore as being sort of, people talk about it as being fascist.
Mahathir in Malaysia.
Mahathir, this guy, as long as it's benign and coming at it from a good place rather than a Hitler-esque place, it often works, because it's like somebody goes, look, let's fucking get it done, I want it to work well.
Well, I think you're sitting in a country that's going through that debate at the moment. The president here has got lots of strengths, and the one strength that he has is that he does understand the people. And we are only sitting, by the way, in Istanbul, where less than a quarter of the population live, but the people over on the other side in Anatolia, that's what he understands. He understands what they want. Now, nobody necessarily supports the way in which he's done it. He doesn't always say the right thing, but there is some sort of good to come out of it, in that firstly, he's got no competition who can do that, and secondly, he's earned the respect of an awful lot of people around here. Now, I don't agree, and my wife, who is Turkish, doesn't always agree with everything he says, and maybe some people say, oh, he's so he's this, he's that, he's whatever. But, as long as the iron fist doesn't become too much made of iron, a gloved hand can still be a useful thing.
You mentioned when we sat down that this place most reminded you of Thailand.
Yeah.
And so there's a Thaksin similarity there.
I think there's a Thaksin similarity. I think the Thai comparison comes maybe a slightly different angle. I hadn't thought of the Thaksin one, but a slightly different angle in that Turkey is very parochial. It's very, very Turkish. Sounds silly, but that's what it is, and no one should disrespect that. So when you come and do business here, you better learn how to speak the language. And I think the same happens in Thailand.
When you get out of Bangkok, though, he was giving cows and sheep out to the people in the regions,
right.
and that was how he was winning the votes.
That's right. But if you look at the Thai culture is very strong, as is Turkish culture, and people doing business there, there's far less expat favours. Expats are being hounded to some degree, and we have a lot less expats in our office than we used to have it. And yet, on the other side, a bit like Turkey, you go to the resorts and the tourism industry, and they'll welcome everybody. So going back to the Iron Fist thing, I think, yes, there are some governments that have that. However, there needs to be healthy opposition. So my Iron Fist bit is slightly qualified in that you can't just do it on your own. You need other people to have a voice and be accountable. And
how important do you feel is one of the other roles I think Turkey, and to a lesser, probably to a similar extent, Egypt has to play, is this sort of role in the sort of Islamicism, rise of ISIS, etc. in the region. Where do you see all that from being close to the ground here? I know it's a tricky question.
It's a tricky question, and one I maybe have to be a bit sensitive of.
Sure.
I mean, obviously,
you don't need to talk about it.
Don't worry. I mean, obviously, everybody is frightened of this, and it's not just about ISIS. It's a more fundamental movement that the kind of whole Islamic world wants to maybe try and create. The question is how fundamental they're going to try and be in pushing it back against the way in which other people live versus the way in which they live. And if they don't accept that, then that's going to be a problem. But if they do accept it, and ISIS at the moment is not accepting it, you speak to people in Turkey who are much more moderate, by the way, they don't feel that ISIS are really part of their religion. They don't feel that aligned to that.
Some of the Egyptians I've spoken to as well, they're also strong countries who have people who go, look, when people say Islam is a peaceful religion, it's like saying, Christianity, I suppose, is a peaceful religion, which at its core it is as well. But there's plenty of crap in the Bible that kind of nicely pushed to one side.
That's right.
And I think what we need to do as a sort of non-Muslim people is not get hysterical about this, but also understand that there's a difference between being a Muslim and being an Islamicist, and also being a jihadist. And so we're narrowing down every time we go on that thing. And I think certainly walking around here, and even in Dubai and also Muscat where I was, and I'm going to Sarajevo tomorrow, when you visit these places, you see actually it's not all mental, okay? But I also feel that it's beholden on, if Ireland was suddenly this kind of mental we're going to go and behead people all the way down to Jerusalem and take it back for the Irish monks or something, we get shut down.
You would do
pretty quickly.
As long as the Guinness factory doesn't close, I think that's the main.
Would take over that.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of one of the main things that we'd want. We'd want the Rosa Trulli. Exactly, and a couple of other bits and pieces. No, and I think the attitude here is that it's always been a very moderate state. Kemal Ataturk set it up like that. He was very much a supporter of non-headscarves and respected the Muslim religion.
There's a great story about him when he was trying to work out how he could modernise to the removal of headscarves and stuff. And apparently he said, I don't know whether you've heard this story, but the idea they came up with was everybody can or cannot wear a headscarf, but the people who must wear it are prostitutes. Have you heard this?
No.
That was his solution. So he said, basically, if you want to wear a headscarf, you can, but the people who have to wear them are prostitutes. And that was his way of getting people to take their headscarves off, because suddenly people, I'm not wearing
I'm not one of them, yes, exactly. I'm not. But I mean, he stood for that, and I think where the clash is coming is that there's a feeling that some of the values that he espoused of what is a pure Muslim religion existing within some democratic modernist society are now being pushed against by something that's more fundamental and more with an iron fist, and I think that's where the clash is coming. It's not about a clash between Muslims, it's about a clash in the way in which people are expressing it, so the current regime versus his regime, and a lot of people would say you shouldn't change the guy who founded where we are. I mean, Turkey would not exist if it
Well,
was...
he would be seen as an enemy of ISIS.
Well, he would be, absolutely, in a way. And he'd certainly be seen as, not as an enemy, but certainly an opposition to the current, the current regime. But people's respect for him remains huge. He has his own day. A lot of the initiatives he founded, his support particularly for children. There's a Children's Day here, which is massive. The liberalisation of women, all of that is something that we can only
two
be
countries,
thankful for.
that I'm most impressed with, because even it's not quite the same in Indonesia, but like certainly Egypt or Cairo, and Istanbul are two really progressive.
Yes.
Like their people here are smart and they kind of get it, and they're not like.
Well, they are. They're very smart people. I mean, the global CEO and chairman CEO of Coca-Cola is a Turk. Not many people realise that. And actually, up until a year ago, his number 2 was as well. So the two most powerful people on the world's biggest brand were Turkish. And they're also, in the literary world, in the arts world. I'm not sure about the music. I'm not a great fan of Turkish music, but certainly of those, there's Nobel Prizes for literature. The problem is will this sort of more fundamental approach that's happening at the moment, will that quash some of that? And there's a number of Turkish people that are very talented that are saying, I don't want to stay in Turkey anymore. I want to move overseas. The education system sucks. The whole shift in the religion is moving. So you've got to watch the next...
There's a certain amount of also not interfering. Do you agree with that? Like, there's a certain amount of, we're our thing, and they're their thing, and someone else is someone else's thing, the Chinese are their thing. There's a certain amount of just work it out yourselves, guys.
Yeah, well, that's what they should do, but this is where the iron fist comes in, because if you're not allowed to be democratic in the way in which you do that, the iron fist will just tell you what to do.
Well, I meant the other iron fist, the iron fist of America or the West.
Oh, I see, okay.
Interfere and just go, look, guys, sort it out.
No, that's absolutely right, but I think what they're trying to do is
protect the royal
they're trying to... And also, because Turkey borders 8 countries, 7 of which has problems, and clearly Syria is an important connection, but maybe that's for another conversation rather than me.
We're not going to solve the Middle East problem.
We're not going to solve the Middle East crisis at the moment, no. As long as the command
one of the things
station...
I do believe is that we need to talk about it. We need to be prepared to talk about Islam and Muslims, and they need to be able to talk back to us and give us their point of view without hacking our heads off or us blowing them up. So anyway, we'll move on from that. You left the Middle East to go to Asia. Was it Korea you went to?
I went to Korea, yes, I went to Seoul. So we survived the Middle East war. The next thing that turned up was mini submarines from North Korea. Crashing on the rocks of South Korea.
Now explain that to people who don't remember.
North Korea, as you know, and South Korea have what they call an armistice. They don't actually have a treaty. So technically they're still at war. I think there are 250,000 mines that lie between the two countries. North Korea is what they call the Hermit Kingdom, although not very hermetic in the sense that the Kim Jong-un and Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-sun, who are the 3 presidents, have always been fairly vociferous. So I've actually been up to the border, and as an American tourist sat next to me on the way back, which is Pyongyang, said, oh God, that was so boring, it was kind of quiet. And I said, actually, that's the point. The point is the tension. You could almost cut it. Exactly. You could almost cut it with a knife. You can fit. And these guys stand there half behind a building. And you can see the North Koreans symbolised by their very large caps looking down, and the rock soldiers, which are the North Korean, South Korean soldiers on the border.
Some guy to get an epileptic fit with a machine gun.
Oh, well, it'll be. And I hate to think of the consequences. They reckon they could be in Seoul within an hour, and there are a lot of them around. And by the way, if you're on the South Korean side, you're not allowed to wear shorts or thongs, because the North Korean propaganda will then say, look at the South, they can't even afford to finish their trousers. And look, they don't even wear socks. So it's a huge thing. I think the funniest thing is the flags. 2 of the biggest flags in the world are there, and the South Korean one looked at the North Korean one and said, we need to make ours a centimetre bigger. And the North Koreans made theirs a centimetre bigger. Actually, eventually one of them, and I don't know which one, actually collapsed because it was becoming so big. Yes.
That's hilarious.
Yes.
I never knew that.
So the North Koreans supposedly sent down spy submarines, these mini subs, into South Korean waters.
Is that like a one-man submarine?
Is it a mini? So they're called mini subs. Yes, it's sort of a padillo with a cover on the top, just in case you go under. And they were found. Some were beached on the rocks, but some of them were found. And I have to say, I can't remember the full story, but there was a bit of tension. So straight out of the Gulf War into that meant, obviously this is going to follow me around for the rest of my life. And in Seoul, I had a wonderful experience. The Koreans were terrific. They will either reject you, or they will stand in front of a bullet for you. There's no kind of in between ground. Fantastic food culture.
Did you eat like dogs?
Not that I know of, and apparently the sign is if you eat dog and you go out in the streets, other dogs will come and sniff you because they can smell the dog coming through. So that never happens.
Not eat you.
No, they won't eat you. No, they won't think you're a dog. They'll just sniff other dogs. They might cock your leg against you, but then or try and mate you. Yes, exactly, on your shoe. It was a fascinating journey. I was there about 3 years, just under 3 years, and the sport was good, the climate was great, the skiing was fantastic.
So we're now like in your mid-30s?
Yeah, so now mid-30s. No. Met the future Mrs. Fraser there, as they call it, the FMF. She was working for BAT, she was marketing director, not a client, I hasten to add. And at the end of career, we were sort of together, but not together, so to speak, and she came back. She's actually Turkish, and she came back to Turkey. And I went on to my next challenge, which was to run our group in the Philippines.
Which I also looked after for Sach.
Oh, so right, okay, so we have a common ground there.
The Philippines, if anyone who listening to this has committed a murder, needs to hide, needs to get out of the way of Interpol, that is the place to go. In my view, you could walk into the Philippines with a fake passport made out of crayons that says that your name is Mickey Mouse, and as long as there was a couple of $100 in there, you'd be allowed.
However, since the recent elections, this certain Mr. Duarte has promised that capital punishment will happen to anyone who commits crimes, particularly extortion, robbery, theft, murder, and they will shoot them on sight. And he was the ex-mayor of Mindanao, which was the problem island in the south, and that's what he did. And there's one accusation levelled against him is that he had these death squads who were out there basically, popping people off. So, Philippines, and he's also threatened curfews.
We're entering an iron fist Philippines.
Absolutely. We're back to the Marcos era, interestingly, and I think populist Philippines actually quite like that because then they see that as a more democratic distribution of wealth.
Family-friendly.
Well, also distribution of wealth. I mean, they're going to get something that only the rich, and they're very, very rich, and by the way, they are very rich, and particularly the Chinese very rich, have in the Philippines. A wonderful time in the Philippines, and the people there just saw the glass as half full. I remember there used to be a railway line that went down the middle of Manila, and people's lives were on this railway line, and they used to have those old bogey carts that you sort of pushed up and down, and that was the grocery van. And then when the 213 came in, obviously everybody had to lift off the stuff.
It's like instead of when we were playing football as kids going car, it was like train.
Exactly, train coming, and their whole life just shut the door. But then what they did in the Philippines is that they built apartments near the railway line, spanking brand new, and offered them for free, running water, and they all said no. Well, don't mess with our lives. This is what we've lived up with. We're happy with a corrugated iron shack. The problem is that we come at it with a lens that is our lens, and we actually never put on the lens of their lens. And actually, if they looked at our world, they'd probably think it's ridiculous.
I think a lot of the anger and irritation that Westerners, expats, America, big Western governments cause Asian, African countries is this kind of just desire to impose. And maybe it goes back to colonial times, but this desire to constantly impose. You're thinking on us, and it's like we don't think that way.
No, and I think that's totally wrong. And I think Asia's fighting back. And I think there's a feeling sort of belittlement. It's like, who are they? Whereas we're wealthy, big Western powers.
Well, if our lives were perfect and we didn't have marriage breakup and we had very happy children and we all didn't go to shrinks and we didn't have the whole world economy collapsing around us like a flan in a cupboard every now and then. Yes, we may have a point. Yes. But they can always go,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we do a lot of things. We do a lot of things better. Having lived through those Asian countries, I learned much more when I was east than I was west.
I agree.
About life, and the Philippines certainly taught me about humility.
Explain that a bit more.
So humility is, I think the Philippines is a very underrated country. I think the Philippines should have been probably the centre of Asia. If you think geographically, it's halfway between kind of Hong Kong and Singapore. In a way, it's halfway between sort of Japan and Thailand. It's the most English-speaking at that time. And yet, it's never got up to that status. Now, that could be a criticism. But at the same time, the Philippines are very humble people. They never try and kind of push themselves in front of you, but they're very happy to join in, and they're very happy to teach, and they're very happy to learn, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. And the joy and the kind of celebrity nature of them, they're the best karaoke singers and impersonators in the world, and I'm sorry, the Koreans, but you may find that hard. Now, there was a slight dark side in the Iron Fist, and I was there when there was a coup. I was about to close the office when Estrada, the Arab as they called him, was sort of being imprisoned, and there were sort of Molotov cocktails starting to fly around, and we were right on the street. And then he got arrested and taken away, and you know what happened? You know, the opposition guys would sort of come out and shake hands with each other. It was almost like this was a game of soccer. Take their bag of rice, because they'd all been told, they'd all been told, you do this side. So the reds, blues, I can't remember the colours were. So it made it all, and they were making a joke of it, so it was quite funny. They were almost making a joke of the joke.
Until
that
next
was the Philippines.
Until
next time, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, we'll see you soon. But what nobody wanted was a kind of another Marcos era type of approach. It's interesting to see what the latest elections.
It's one of, when we talked earlier about letting countries kind of get on with it. It's one of those that's really tried to do that.
Well, I think that's a very good point. Nobody's interfered there. I think to a large extent that's been the same with Korea, and I think it's been the same with Japan, and look how they've progressed. I think the Philippines have been left alone. They're very sympathetic, they're very, very kind, and I think this is largely found a little bit not only in their character but also their religion. They are Catholic, but in the nice Catholic way. I don't mean Catholic in the strictest flagellate themselves way, but perhaps.
So where did you go after
Malaysia?
Ah, okay.
Another Muslim country. So I'd now been through the Middle East.
What year are we in now?
97. The end of Mahathir's reign.
And the Malaysian crisis.
Yep, and very much the Malaysian crisis.
Seems to follow you everywhere
exactly.
you go.
Well, this is it. Yeah. So we had Gulf War, mini subs, coups, and now, Mahathir had been there for a long time and still is very vocal. My gosh, some people still feel he's there. So Malaysia was an interesting experience. I really enjoyed it. I think this coming together of three different races, and it really is. I can't think of another place in the world that
Singapore and Malaysia
is truly. Well, even Singapore is still dominated by the kind of Chinese base. Whereas Malaysian, Malays, Indians, and Chinese.
They had riots up until like the 80s,
and they still it's still not
flares up.
It still flares up, and it's still
plus their little sultanates.
Yeah, absolutely. Plus it has the sultanate goes around. And they rotate. So the sultan rotates. But it's a wonderful country. It's a beautiful country. It's got the oldest forest in the world. It's probably got some of the nicest golf courses in the world. Some of the best diving in the world. And the food is just, I think, it's arguably the best in Asia. And just before Malaysia, I got married. So I got married to the Turk.
Yes.
And took her with me to Malaysia. So Malaysia was interesting from that point of view.
And where did you go after there?
And Malaysia, then on to Hong Kong. Out of Hong Kong, where I met some of the people you mentioned earlier on, and also two small people. So two small people came along, twins, twin boy and girl, Ben Adam and Maya Sophie. So I got one of each, and they're now 7.5. It was great, and we absolutely loved Hong Kong. And if you ask me which is the place out of all of the ones I've mentioned that I'd probably most like to go back to, it would be there. Yes, and Hong Kong has that little element a bit like Thai, the way they mix kind of a bit like here actually.
It does.
They mix modernity and history very well together.
And then you came to Turkey after that.
And then I came to Turkey after that.
So after this mental sort of career and around the world and travelling and running big business, what are the kind of 2 or 3 lessons that you've learned? That, like, one of the things of the podcast is passing stuff back to the previous you.
I go back to the first thing I said earlier. If you're ever going to ask the question, I wonder what it would have been like, for God's sake, don't let that pass. I think the second thing is to find a way to immerse yourself completely. Food allows you to do that, music allows you to do that, some of the other performing arts, dress, whatever it might be. And I'd say the third thing is, for me, is if you are moving around a lot, you've got to be totally committed to doing what you're going to do. Don't think of the next move while you're in the previous move. Even if you hear you're going to be moving in 3 months, people will sense that. And the world is not about the West, to your earlier point. It's about, West, East, Middle, North, South, whatever, and each has their own culture. Allow them to live that way.
When I first went to Singapore, my good friend Charles Anderson, who's very erudite, 6'8" Englishman, said to me, Sean, you've just got to understand that the Chinese hate to lose face. Under no circumstances should you let a Chinese person lose face. And I said, what about the fucking English?
Yes. But isn't it about time they did it?
He said, you're the worst at losing face.
I was going to say, pot calling the kettle.
Hooliganism, Falkland Islands, Ireland, etc.
Pot calling the kettle black.
No, you're not taking that off us. Before we finish, your views on the future of the world for your 2 small kids?
Well, I think it's going to be tough. I think they're going to live in a different world. They're going to live in an online world for a start, a global world, because it's going to be connected. So we're encouraging them to learn languages,
Yeah.
to learn cultures, and actually them being part of this culture. I think competition will get tougher and tougher. Kids they're competing with the Koreans and the Chinese, and I tell you what, they're a lot better than a lot of other Western kids.
What about from a humanity point of view? Like,
So interesting, the first World Humanitarian Summit has just happened here. That was a big statement. I don't know what's come out of that, but I mean, I'm clearly, everybody's massively concerned. I mean, that's a very facile statement, but I want our kids to be as responsible as that. The Turks, to be perfectly honest, are not great at doing that. There are some individual pockets where they are aware that things need to get better in terms of polluting the world, and I use that in the broadest sense. So kids have got to understand, I guess, two things. One is technology in its purest form, and the second thing is environment. And if I was to give them two themes, that's what I would give them to work on.
Stephen Fraser, it's a great place to end it. A man who has travelled the world and clearly picked up an awful lot of wisdom and ideas and thoughts about how we will perform as people going forward. Thank you very much for coming on A Pint with Seaniebee. Best of luck in the future.
Thank you.
Look after
Pleasure.
yourself now.
Thank you. Thank you.